The old farm had stood untouched for decades, its history buried beneath layers of whispered legends and overgrown weeds. When Jacob and Anya stumbled upon the property listing, its price was suspiciously low, almost too good to be true. But they were desperate, both running from lives that had worn them down to the bone. For them, the isolation seemed like a blessing. "Imagine what we could do with this place," Anya murmured, running her fingers along the chipped porch railing. "We could grow our own food, live off the land." Jacob stared past her, his gaze lingering on the endless fields of wheat that stretched to the horizon. "Yeah," he said softly, though something deep in his chest tightened. The stillness of the land wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Their dog, Rusty, seemed to sense it too. The usually fearless shepherd mix refused to leave the car, his ears flat against his skull. Jacob had to carry him inside, the dog whining the entire way. The first few days were uneventful, though the farm carried an oppressive air. The rooms were dim, the windows coated in grime, and the faint scent of rot clung to the walls no matter how much Anya scrubbed. At night, the wind moaned through the broken shutters, carrying with it an odd whispering sound that neither of them could explain. It was on their third morning that Anya noticed the scarecrow. She had gone outside to hang laundry and froze mid-step, her gaze locking onto the figure standing in the middle of the field. Its body was slumped, dressed in tattered clothing, and its head, a burlap sack, was cocked at an unnatural angle. "Did you put that there?" she asked Jacob when he joined her on the porch. He frowned. "No, I didn't even know we had a scarecrow." "That's strange," Anya murmured. "It wasn't there yesterday." Jacob shrugged it off, chalking it up to the previous owners leaving it behind. But as the day wore on, both of them found their eyes drawn to the figure in the field. It seemed wrong. Though it didn't move, its presence felt intrusive, almost alive. That night, the whispers grew louder. Jacob lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Anya slept beside him. Rusty whimpered at the foot of the bed, his ears perked and his eyes fixed on the window. A soft tap, 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 broke the silence. Jacob's breath hitched. He sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight on the nightstand. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. Rusty growled low in his throat. "Stay here," Jacob whispered to Anya, who had stirred awake. He crept to the window and peered outside. The fields were bathed in moonlight, swaying gently in the breeze. But something was wrong. The scarecrow, which should have been in the middle of the field, was now leaning against the fence just feet from the house. Jacob's stomach turned. He grabbed the shotgun by the door and stepped outside, the cool night air prickling his skin. Anya followed him, clutching a flashlight. "Jacob, don't," she pleaded. "It's just a scarecrow." But as they approached, the figure seemed to radiate malice. Its head tilted slightly, almost as if it were watching them. Jacob raised the shotgun, his finger trembling on the trigger. Then, without warning, the flashlight flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, Jacob swore he heard it, a low, guttural chuckle, barely louder than a whisper. The following days passed in a haze of unease. Tools vanished from the barn, only to reappear in strange places. The scarecrow seemed to change positions daily, each time moving closer to the house. Anya began waking up with scratches on her arms and legs, deep and fresh as if something had clawed at her in her sleep. "I don't like this," she confessed one afternoon as they stood in the kitchen. "What if we leave? Sell the place and go somewhere else?" Jacob hesitated. The thought of leaving crossed his mind too, but something about the farm held him. It wasn't just fear. It was a strange, inexplicable pull. That night, they heard footsteps outside their window. Heavy, deliberate steps crunching across the gravel. Rusty barked furiously, his body pressed against the door. Jacob swung it open, shotgun in hand, but the yard was empty. The only sound was the faint rustle of wheat in the distance. When they turned to go back inside, the scarecrow was standing at the edge of the porch steps. The next morning, Jacob decided enough was enough. He dragged the scarecrow to the barn and doused it in gasoline. ignoring Anya's protests. "This thing is evil," he said through gritted teeth. "I'm ending it." As the flames consumed the straw and burlap, a scream erupted, a sound so inhuman, so filled with rage and agony, that it brought both of them to their knees. Rusty howled, his body trembling. When the fire died down, the ashes were carried off by the wind. For the first time in days, the fields seemed calm. But that night, the whispers returned, louder than ever. Jacob woke to find Anya missing. The bed was cold and the door was wide open. Heart pounding, he grabbed the flashlight and shotgun, calling her name as he stepped into the night. The wheat fields were eerily still. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing Anya standing in the middle of the field. Her white nightgown glowed faintly in the moonlight. "Anya!" he shouted, running toward her. She didn't move. When he reached her, he saw she was clutching a bundle of straw in her hands, her shoulders shaking as though she were laughing. But her laughter was silent. "Anya?" Jacob whispered, his voice breaking. She turned to him slowly, her face pale and her eyes empty. "He says he wants you next," she murmured, her voice hollow. Before Jacob could react, the wheat around him came alive, the stalks twisting and wrapping around his legs. He screamed, struggling to break free, but the more he fought, the tighter they held him. Jacob was never seen again. The next owners found the farm abandoned, the fields overgrown and lifeless. But the scarecrow still stood in the center of the field, its head adorned with auburn hair, its body clothed in familiar tattered garments. Locals whispered of the curse, of the voices that lured unsuspecting souls to their doom. And on quiet nights, if you stood by the edge of the farm, you could hear the whispers, calling for someone new to join them.